Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of stenciling with our acrylic paints here. First of all, we're going to do the basics of base painting. So I'm going to go through 3 techniques for you today. Yesterday in part 1, we went through just the basic supplies that you need to get started when you're sign painting with vinyl stencils. And today we're going to do the base coating, staining, and ombre. So those techniques, some basic tips and tricks on how to do this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post it below. I'm working with our lemon tiered tray pieces, so some small wood pieces, and I've already gone ahead and base coated a couple so I can show you what that second coat looks like without having to wait for paint to dry. And of course I'm going to roll up my sleeves because I usually get paint all up my arms and all over my hands. So some basic tips for painting. I'm actually going to grab my white paint here. I'm using Homeworks Etc. acrylic paints on this project, and I'm using our 1-inch brush. So I am not going to overload my brush. So that's one of the tips. You don't want to overload your brush because that will just create a bit of a mess. You also want really smooth brush strokes so that tomorrow when I show you how to do your stenciling and paint that, you have a super smooth surface to start with. So I just dip my paintbrush right into the container, and you can see there's no drip marks on that at all. And I always start with my edges first. Some people start with the top and then they end up with super messy hands because they have nothing to hold on to, or you get that wonderful triangle or whatever shape you're working on mark on your surface, which again is why we're using our canvas drop cloth. So I always work on the edges first, and the worst thing is if you don't have a canvas drop cloth, you're using too much paint. You put your pieces down to dry and then they stick to your paper or whatever it is you're using. So you want to try to avoid that as well. So it's best to just reapply your paint versus overloading the paint. And you can see even just, you're not going to get the perfect edge. Of course, we're always going to do 2 coats. So paint your edges first. And then after you paint your edges, this material that we're working with is MDF right now. So you're going to find that the edges are a little bit more porous. And so there I've applied way too much paint. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm going to just keep on moving it as far as I can before I reapply any paint. So we're going to do the edges first, and of course if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment box. So again, you don't want to overload your paint. Work on your edges first. Always go back and look so that you can pick up any of the excess paint, so you don't get heaviness on the edges. And then you go ahead and do your top. So again, you don't want to overload. Let's see, how can I get this? There we go. So you don't want to overload, and you don't want to splatter paint on the rest of your pieces. And again, I think I have a little bit too much, so I'm going to offload some paint. And it looks like, there you go. Again, always looking back at your edges so that you don't get excess paint. After you do your top, you always find that there's just one edge that gets a little bit extra drippy on the side. And that's it. So that is your base coat of your wood. So again, edges first always, and then do your top. So I'm just going to put that to the side to dry. You're going to see me using a lot of paintbrushes today. I have extras so that I don't have to wash my brushes in between, and you don't have to wait for me to do that. Now this is our buttercup cream. So this is our first coat. In all of our kits, and if you're doing this at home, we use a 400 grit sandpaper. Always sand in between coats. Super light, but it makes all the difference in the world. And again, super light, but you can feel the difference. So every time you add paint to wood, it raises the grain of the wood. So you want to just make sure that you sand this down. This is super important. Now the edges don't matter so much because you're just painting the edges, but I like to do an overall good finish all around. So again, you're gonna get a little bit of fine dust, and you can see just a little bit of dust. It's discoloring, which is why I wear my apron too. I always get dust all over my clothes, so I prefer to do that on the apron. And it's super, super smooth, which makes all the difference with stenciling. So again, a 400 grit sandpaper in between coats, super light. And I always work on the front surface and the edges of my piece. And then the back, I always do last after stenciling. So always just work on the front face first, and then with my extra paint at the very, very end, I always do my back. I always want to make sure that the front surface has got the most attention. So again, same thing, sand your edges first and then do the top. So same process applies when you're doing your second coat. Do your edges first, then do your top. So I don't think I need to go through that process again. You don't need to watch me paint. So I'm actually just gonna put that away. So I hope that's like super, super easy, right? Edges first and then the top. So I'm gonna put that aside. The second tip I'm gonna show you now, this only works with pine wood. So we have pine wood, you can see the wood grain in there, and sometimes you get knots. Let's see, I've got another piece here. So you can pick the preference that you like, whether it's the clean or the knots. That's the nice thing with this wood is you get to kind of choose. I'm going to show you how to stain pine with acrylic paint. So you can turn paints into stain by just adding water. So I have some water on the side here, and you do not need very much paint at all. And in fact, the more water you use, the messier it is. So it does depend on the project size. You want to make sure that you mix enough paint. So I have slate. This is our Homeworks Etc. slate color, and it goes into a beautiful gray stain. And so that is a 1 coat, and it's hard to see actually for you guys. It looks really light, but to me it's a beautiful gray. This would be something that I would do as our signature sign on a front door wreath, would look really nice. And so I'm just taking again, a 1-inch brush. You can use a foam brush for this as well. Actually, let me use a foam brush, that way you can see that. So I'm gonna dip my paint. I'm not using very much. And I actually have a plate here. So I'm just gonna work on blending my paint on this side plate. There's like not enough to even make a drip. So you can see I'm hardly using any. I'm gonna take my foam brush, and so I'm just gonna dip it like super quickly into my water. And foam brushes absorb water a lot more, so I'm just gonna use what it absorbed, and I don't think I made enough. So the one thing with mixing paints is you want to make sure that you do blend enough so that your color stays consistent. And again, let me see, I've got a rag as well. You would use a lint-free rag. So all I've done is I've blended slate acrylic paint with a bit of water, and I'm going to show you on the sides just so that you can see what I'm doing. And you can see it looks a mess, and then I'm just going to wipe it back with my rag, and that is going to show that beautiful wood grain, so it's got that stained look. Now this process takes a lot longer to dry. Now acrylic paint dries fairly quickly, and again, when you're stenciling, you want to make sure that your paint is completely dry, and I'm going to go through that more tomorrow. But today's techniques with the stain, now you want to make sure it's completely dry, because if you went to go apply your stencil on top of a wet surface, it's not going to adhere, or it will over adhere, and then when you pull off your stencil, it'll completely tear the fibers in the wood. So drying time is super critical. Again, if you wanted it a little bit darker, you could wait for it to dry, take a blow dryer to it if you wanted to, and then apply a second coat. I really like this. So you can see that there's still quite a bit left. I could probably go back and do the edges and then do the other side just with what I have without reapplying. And so this paint in our kits usually comes in the 1 ounce containers. you have lots to do, tons of projects. So again, I've got the sides done, and then I'm gonna just move it around the front. And I don't mind my hands getting messy. You can see it's like super messy, and you wanna do the edges as well, wipe it back. Now this only works with real wood. It doesn't work with substrate so much like MDF. So again, it does depend on your material. So what do you guys think? So I love the look of stained wood, and again, you don't need to go and invest in buying different stain types for craft projects. You can just add water. So that's my second paint technique. I'm just gonna move that to the side. And the third one I'm gonna show you is how to do a quick ombre. So ombre, it seems to trick people sometimes in looking like it's this super fancy technique. Now Kim painted this sample for us. This is for one of our summer kits. And this is, she did the front and the back and the sides. So we're using 2 colors to blend. So I am using, there's too much paint on this plate, so if I tipped it, it's gonna drip all over the place. I hope you can see that. There's the lime and Tiffany blue. So these are our Homeworks Etc. acrylic paints. And thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, so these stain techniques are super, super easy to do. If you guys have any questions for me, let me know. So I'm doing this on pine, but you can do this on MDF as well, any substrate at all. I'm actually gonna use my foam brushes, and I am going to kind of segment this into 3. So the top I'm gonna do my edges first. And you guys are gonna have to wait for this paint to dry a little bit here, so that this technique works. So I am doing the top half lime. And so my daughter's birthday is coming up, and these colors are in the birthday tier tray kit. So I am going to figure out a sign that I can do for her. She's turning 20. Ooh. She's 20, I can't believe it. Okay, so I am doing the edges first. And I'm just moving this paint across. Okay, so we're gonna wait for that. And again, you wanna do a super light coat. I got drippiness there all over. And again, these foam brushes are great for base coating. And you can see it looks like a mess in the middle, and that's okay because that's where we're gonna be blending our colors. And in fact, I'm not gonna wait for the paint to dry, so we're not worried about the edges here. For this demonstration, if you were at home, you might wanna let this dry a little bit. So you've got your top color, and then you've got your bottom color. And of course you could get really complicated in ombre, a ton of different colors, but for today we're just going to use the 2 colors. I am going to put this down, and now I'm going to take my edges. I'm going to take one corner and dip it in the lime. Woo! And I'm going to take my other brush and dip it in the Tiffany blue. And then I'm going to blend. So you can see the 2 corners, and I'm gonna make sure that your colors coordinate. If you do the opposite, it gets messy. There we go. And I'm just gonna blend away. So you can see that blended, right? So you can go back and smooth it out on the top, and take this and smooth it out on the bottom. And voila, you have a blended ombre sign. So it's super fun to do this with other stencils when you're doing the overlay. So I always map out my colors that coordinate with my stencils in advance. I hope you have found this tutorial helpful. And again, tomorrow I'm gonna go through the stenciling process, and if you guys have any questions, again, just comment below. Thanks, bye.